Dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yo, what's good, original crew, man? We're back. We got a new Mr. Ballen this week. Mr. Ballen video for this week is if you ring this bell, you're already dead. Did he do one time before and it was like, if you hear this bell ringing?
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that, you know?
I can't remember the exact title, but yeah.
Yeah. Like That's crazy, bro. But all right, before we get into it, always make sure you check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go if you want to first support. All you got to do is check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's visuals.
Liking it with a thumbs up. I can't remember. I was trying to think, but I can't remember. Sorry.
Oh, man. Y'all know we on the road to 300K, man. We trying to get there by the end of
the summer.
So, but we do need y'all help to get there, man. So
yes.
keep spamming us up, man.
Sorry, y'all. I'm all over the place today.
She has been.
My mind is everywhere.
My mind is telling me.
Okay, now come on.
You said not me. Hey, but let's go. Let's check it out. Let's see what's about. You ready?
Yeah.
All right.
Today's story is about one of the most haunted rooms in the world and what happens when you go inside of it. Now, this particular account is from 200 years ago, but the legend of what goes on inside of that room is still very much alive today. However, before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's bathroom and replace their toothpaste with Novocaine. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. Late one evening in 1840, a 30-year-old British nobleman named Sir Robert Warboys stood next to 5 of his closest friends on the front porch of a townhome in one of the fanciest neighborhoods in London, England. The address of this townhome was 50 Berkeley Square, and it was one of dozens of these beautiful brick and marble townhomes that surrounded this big garden. The whole square had been built about 100 years earlier, and since then, it had become one of the most fashionable places for the rich and famous to call home. However, Robert and his friends had not come here to rub shoulders with important people. Instead, Robert had come here to win a bet. So Robert actually was a nobleman. He was like this proper guy, at least on paper. But in reality, at least to his friends, he had a total wild streak. He loved taking on dares. Basically, anytime anybody, challenged him to do something, he would do it, especially if there was money on the line. But it wasn't really about the money. It wasn't about, winning money by doing these different things. He just loved the challenge. He loved the thrill of taking chances. So that night, on the front porch of this townhome, Robert turned and knocked on the front door. And then as soon as he did, he turned back and looked at his friends and grinned at them. And he saw some of them looked really excited and some looked pretty nervous. But to Robert, he was purely happy about how things were going so far. Because he knew, come tomorrow when this whole thing was done and he had won his bet, he would have a great story to tell. A few seconds later, the front door of the townhome swung open and this middle-aged man stepped outside. His name was Charles Benson, and while Robert and Charles did know each other, they were not close friends. They actually only knew each other because they both were members of the same exclusive gentlemen's club in London. Plus, pretty much everybody in London had at least heard of Charles because of all the rumors swirling around about what went on inside of his townhome. Even though Robert had told Charles that on this night, he and his buddies were coming to his townhome for this bet, even though he had clearly told him, Charles still seemed very surprised to see Robert standing there. But Robert nonetheless was like, hey, Charles, how are you? I'm here for the bet. And Charles basically didn't react. He just stared at Robert with this very concerned look on his face and just said, are you sure you really want to do this? And Robert, who knew what he was referencing, just kind of looked down at the pistol on his hip and said, yeah, I'm sure. A few minutes later, Robert and his 5 friends were inside of Charles' townhome in the dining room, sitting around a table, while Charles had gone upstairs to get something. And as they sat there, Robert kind of looked around the room at his friends, and he could tell they were clearly more nervous about this than he was. And so he tried to, keep the mood light by making some jokes and kind of downplaying what he was about to do. But it was like no matter what he did, he could just tell his friends were very uneasy about what was going to happen here. And then a moment later, they heard the sound of Charles coming down the stairs. And Charles, he came in the kitchen, still with a very serious look on his face. And he walked up to them, and he reached in his pocket, and he pulled out this old iron key, and he placed it in the middle of the table. And as soon as he did that, the room went completely silent, and everybody just stared at this key. And then Charles eventually broke the silence and explained to the group that over the last 10 years of living in this townhome, he had only used that key maybe 2 or 3 times total. And when the key was not in use, Charles said he actually hid the key just to make sure it never wound up in the wrong hands. But now, again with that somber look on his face, Charles looked over at Robert and said, "If you're really sure about this, the key is yours to take." And Robert, with no hesitation, reached out and snatched the key, showing his friends and showing Charles that he was not about to get cold feet. A couple of minutes later, all the men stood up from the dining room table, and then Charles led the group up the thin, narrow, creaky staircase to the second floor. And when they got to the second floor, Charles led them down this narrow hallway that came to a stop in front of this closed door. At this point, all 7 men were kind of crowded together right in front of this door. But it was obvious that even though Charles lived in this townhome, he was sort of hesitant to get even close to this door. Like he really didn't want to be anywhere near it. Also, all of Robert's friends were sort of reacting the same way too. I mean, they were the ones that actually dared Robert to do this in the first place. But now that they were actually here, about to go through with it, they were looking at Robert like he was totally insane. And also they were kind of hoping that, maybe he would just back out and they could just leave. But Robert did not seem remotely like he was about to back out. He had a very determined look on his face, and as everybody else was kind of cowering away from this door, Robert stepped up, reached into his pocket, pulled out that iron key, and put it into the lock. And as he began to turn the lock, everybody else took steps farther away from him. And then he pulled open the door, and as he did, everybody gasped, and Robert even took a step backwards. But when Robert actually looked through the now open doorway, he just laughed, because it was just a normal bedroom. It was filled with all this old but very expensive looking furniture. On one side of the room was this big wooden dresser with a huge round mirror above it, and then on the opposite side of the room was this big 4-poster bed. And right above this bed, dangling down from the ceiling, was this red ribbon. Now, Robert knew that in a rich nobleman's house, there were ribbons like this one that are known as bell pulls. A nobleman could pull on that lever, and it was connected to a pulley system that rang a bell down in the servants' quarters. And when the servant heard that bell, they would see what room it was coming from, and they would go up to the room to see what the nobleman needed. And so after taking in the sight of this bedroom, Robert took a confident step into the room. And as soon as he did, Charles reached out and grabbed him by the wrist and said, "Hey, Robert, this is your last chance to change your mind. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" And Robert kind of looked back at his friends and smiled and said, "I'm sure. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning once I've won the bet." Then Robert released Charles's grip on his wrist, walked into the room, turned, shut, and locked the door. At this moment, Robert's friends didn't really know what to do. They were still sort of shocked that Robert was actually going through with this. I mean, even by his standards, this felt particularly reckless. They also felt kind of guilty. I mean, they were the ones who ultimately put him up to this. So, if Robert got hurt, which in theory could actually happen here, it would be partially their fault. And so Robert's friends turned to Charles to see what he was thinking. And Charles had this very grave, resigned expression on his face. And he just told them, "I have one more thing to show you before we go to bed." So Robert's friends followed Charles back down the hallway, down the stairs, past the dining room, towards the very back of the townhome. And when they got there, they found there was sort of like a studio apartment area back there. There was a kitchen area, a laundry area, and there were several beds. Charles explained this was where his servants lived and worked, but he had given them all the night off because he knew it was possible that Robert and his friends would be here for this bet and they would need a place to stay. Charles pointed to a space right above the beds where there was this row of all these bells in a horizontal line. Each of these bells were connected to various bell pulls throughout the house. And he pointed to one particular bell and told them that that was the one that was connected to the bell pull in the room Robert was staying in tonight. And so he said it was their job tonight to constantly monitor that bell all night. So somebody had to be awake all night listening to that bell. Because heaven forbid, if Robert pulls that bell, that was going to be the signal that something bad had happened in that room. And so their job was basically to be on guard all night to potentially run up and rescue Robert if he needed it.
Ciao.
Around 3 hours later, all of Robert's friends were sitting on the floor in the servants' quarters playing blackjack. It was almost midnight, and all of them were exhausted, but they were too on edge to sleep. They were so focused on this bell, and they were so worried about Robert and, wondering if he was really okay up there. And they also had become convinced that, maybe the bell would ring and they wouldn't hear it if they were making too much noise.
Yeah.
And so they had made this decision to silently play blackjack and just focus exclusively on this bell. But it had really created a lot of extra tension in the room. They're basically all just staring at the bell, dealing one hand after another, paranoid it would go off, and wondering what would even happen if it did. And so hand after hand, the friends are playing blackjack, anxiously watching this bell being completely silent. And then suddenly they hear this sound that makes them all jump. But it wasn't the bell. It was a blood-curdling scream coming from upstairs. And for a moment, the friends just sat there in shock. And then they got up and began running out of the servants' quarters to see what was going on. And as they did, Robert's bell began ringing furiously, so loud it hurt their ears. And so they charge out of the servants' quarters and literally bump into Charles, who also is coming to figure out what's going on. And as a group, they begin running up the stairs to the second floor. And all the while, the bell is ringing furiously. There's screams coming from Robert's bedroom. And by the
When you think somebody should have stayed upstairs,
Just to be closer.
and then somebody go ahead and unlock,
The bell is ringing furiously. There's screams coming from Robert's bedroom. And by the time they got to the second floor, suddenly everything went silent. The ringing stopped, the screaming stopped. They're in the second floor in that hallway, and it's just deadly silent. And up ahead of them is that closed door. And so Charles and the group, they begin walking down the hall, having no idea what to expect. And right as they're about to reach the door, they hear this loud bang sound. And then silence again. Seconds later, Robert's friends were at that door, pounding on it, screaming for Robert, come open the door, because Robert was the only one with the key.
Oh, that's
But
right.
Robert wasn't making any noise. The room was still totally silent.
So if he got the key, how does Charles always be able to get back in if the person gets the key and go inside?
Saying like if something was to happen, how does he?
But also,
retrieve the key
whoever,
back?
if somebody dies in there, how are you able to get in if they can't open the door?
That's what I'm saying. That's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, good question.
Robert was the only one with the key, but Robert wasn't making any noise. The room was still totally silent. And so eventually the friends began kicking on this door to try to break it down. All the while, Charles is just kind of standing back in the hallway watching this horrible thing unfold. And then finally, the friends manage to literally kick the door in. I mean, it's a 100-year-old house. The door gets kicked in, and the friends stumble into the room, and they look over towards the bedroom, and they all just freeze in shock. When Charles bought this townhome 10 years earlier, it came with a very dark backstory. The previous owner had apparently kept his violent and psychotic brother locked up inside of this second floor bedroom where
gosh.
Robert was. And after this brother died inside of this room, all these strange and frightening things began happening inside of this room. People began hearing these awful wailing sounds coming out of this room when nobody was in there. And then they'd go into the room and the wailing would stop, but furniture had been moved all around the room, even though, again, no one had been in there to do that. And then also, people began seeing this sort of amorphous gray figure sort of moving around inside of that room, especially at night, kind of slinking up against the wall and across the floor. And even though nobody had any idea what it was, it just felt like it was evil. And so they began calling it the nameless thing, and they referred to it as the physical manifestation of evil. However, not everybody believed this story. In fact, one person who absolutely did not believe the story was Robert Warboys. He thought this was just a tall tale designed to scare people. And so when his friends dared him to spend one night inside of that bedroom where supposedly the nameless thing lived, he happily accepted, because to him, it didn't seem risky at all. You know, spending one night in the haunted room was no big deal because it's not actually haunted. He'd be fine. And anyways, it would make for a great story to tell down at the Gentleman's Club. Unfortunately though, The night in that bedroom did not go as Robert hoped. When Robert's friends burst through the bedroom door and looked inside, the first thing they noticed was the bell pull, the ribbon from the ceiling, had been yanked out of the ceiling, and Robert's pistol was on the ground next to the bed. And then on the other side of the room, there was a very obvious bullet hole in the wall. And so that was the loud bang sound they heard as they were coming down the hall. It was the pistol going off. And then there was Robert. Robert was laying on the bed, and he was totally rigid, and he actually was still clutching the red ribbon from the bell pull. And as they stared at him, they saw his eyes were wide open and bloodshot, and his lips were kind of pulled back in this horrible grimace with his teeth exposed. And for a second, his friends thought Robert must be having a seizure of some kind. That's why he was so tight on the bed like that. And so they ran to him, trying to snap him out of it. But as soon as they touched him, they realized that the reason he was rigid was not because of a seizure. It was because Robert was dead. That night, Charles would call the local coroner, who would come by and take Robert's body, and also he would open up an official inquest into Robert's death to figure out what had happened to him. And the verdict of this inquest was that Robert had died from massive heart failure caused by unknown circumstances. But to Charles and all of Robert's friends who were there that night and actually saw Robert in the room, it seemed plainly obvious that what had happened here was Robert had come in contact with the so-called nameless thing.
And he said Charles is the one who got the autopsy done, right?
Oh, did he?
Up an official inquest into seizure. It was because Robert was dead. That night, Charles would call the local coroner, who would come by and take Robert's body, and also he would open up an official inquest into Robert's death to figure out what had happened to him. And the verdict of this inquest was that Robert had died from massive heart failure caused by unknown circumstances. But to Charles and all of Robert's friends who were there that night and actually saw Robert in the room, it seemed plainly obvious that what had happened here was Robert had come in contact with the so-called nameless thing in that room. And it literally scared him to death. In the nearly 200 years since Robert's death, 50 Berkeley Square has had many different owners, and virtually all of them have reported either seeing, feeling, or hearing some sort of malevolent, ghostly presence inside of that second floor bedroom. To this day, that particular bedroom, where the nameless thing apparently resides, is considered one of the most haunted places in the entire world.
So if it's still standing, right? 50 Berkeley Place. Does anyone go in the room?
Not even that. My biggest thing is, has anyone else ever died?
I was thinking that earlier, but then I was like,
because nobody else has died, and we don't got any reports. Then
is it a door? Is it like a place for someone to come into another? Because I'm like,
because you can go with the haunted theory,
yeah,
like that the place is haunted,
I ain't
right?
putting that on nobody and nothing like that. I'm just,
you can go with the haunting theory, or if you want to go to a deeper theory, Charles, why you don't have more than one key to this damn door? Once the person goes in,
and you know something, I wouldn't even.
Oh, I was gonna go deeper with a theory.
Oh, never mind.
You ready?
Go ahead.
All right, go down this lane with me, right? Charles is the one who had the what's called done, right?
Mm-hmm.
The autopsy done.
Mm-hmm.
So he's the one who reached out to the coroner and had the autopsy done. 2, Charles, you gave him the key. You don't. When the friends are trying to get into the room, you sit back and, because we really don't know what really happened. Ballen only is getting like 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation hand-me-down information, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody knows exactly what happened. So you can only take Mr. Ballen what he said, a little ounce of what really happened.
So with those,
I'm not done.
I just got a question. Just want to chime in. With those type of doors, it's like the inside, like inside the room. It's only like the key.
But then Charles unlock it, so it's probably one of those that got a lock on the outside and a lock on the inside.
Yeah,
so why wouldn't you have a double lock system where they have You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, walk down this with me. Charles, everybody who works at your townhouse is normally there, right?
Mm-hmm.
This night they're not there.
Mm-hmm.
Because Charles and his friends. Then now they get...
Because Robert and his friends stayed.
I mean, Robert and his friends. My thing is, why not also utilize this situation, right? Why is nobody up there keeping an eye? We rotate around. You like for an hour, you up there. Next hour, somebody else come up. Next hour, somebody else come up. You get what I'm saying?
But it probably wouldn't have done any good if the key is in the room with Robert. Like, what good would...
Again, that part also doesn't make sense to put him in a room with a key.
And that's the only way to get in. And just in case of something. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Also, like you said at one point, I'm not finished.
Yeah.
Trap door situation. Could there possibly be a trap door with somebody? What I'm basically insinuating, so I can go ahead and wrap it up again. Is there a possibility that Charles can have some shit going on in his room, set people up? He could actually be a serial killer or somebody who gets off a thrill of having people basically killed in his room. Is in your home. Also, you can have a coroner on your side. Let's not act like that shit doesn't happen. You pay, obviously, townhomes like that in London, you had to have money for these townhomes back in the day. The coroner can be on your payroll. You can pay him to say, hey, this is what the autopsy said, but that's not the true autopsy for it. So it's a situation where, hey, write it off as a, you know what I'm saying? It can be a massive, things like that happen, but now with advancement of technology, advancement of information, advancement of knowledge, things like that still happens to this day, but not as often.
Yeah, that's basically what I was trying to get at, but I said I didn't want to put nothing on anyone.
I'm putting it.
And I would have to
he
also,
dead and gone. I don't care.
And I will also have to know if anyone else has lost their life other than Robert.
And if anybody has lost their life since Charles has left.
And since he has left. Or even why he had it. Like if we go put that on him, then even why he had it.
How many people have died? Has anybody died recently? Because I'm sure it's still standing.
Yeah, that's why I said, like, is there any activity still to this day going on? Has anyone slept or went inside the room? Like,
well, they say they're still hearing noises.
But yeah, but I'm not talking about just noises. I'm talking about.
But also, you can just say that old buildings and old homes make noises.
Yeah,
that you know.
But it's an interesting story. It's an interesting story, whether it's like real or not, or if stuff actually happening, or which I do be believing stuff be like in them old homes, old buildings and stuff like that. But
because I'm like, could one of your workers also be the one that was taking people's lives? Because Charles, you knew everything that was going to lead up. So why not prepare yourself just in case? Because you said, hey, if the bell goes start ringing, then we need to make our way up there and all this. So you knew the scenario of everything.
The only thing that I like, if it is real and whatever, well, I mean, I guess you can look up him and see that he's deceased and how he died and stuff like that. But it just would have been like, I would have locked you in the room if that's what you want to do, but we would have kept the key. You ring the bell, we come up and try to rescue you. And that's the only thing that's kind of like blowing me. That's it's so common. Yeah. But yeah, that's the only thing that's kind of like I would have done different if it's something like, oh, it's a bet, I dare you to stay in this room. I just would have kept the key. You already got the bell. The bell already let us know and indicate that, hey, I need help. I want out. Y'all should have kept the key. So y'all took, it takes time to tear a wooden door down. I don't know how thick the door was or how heavy duty it was, but that takes time. So that's the only thing that's kind of weird to me, but yeah.
And I also do believe that there was a lot of serial killers back then.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of serial killers, they did some crazy ass shit.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And also, a lot of wealthy people have done a lot of crazy ass serial killer type shit because they can get away with it and pay people off. You know what I'm saying? It's different nowadays. A lot of stuff that we do nowadays and a lot of stuff is different. Times are different. But in the past, there has been a plethora of rich, wealthy serial killers because they felt like money can get them off. They could be able to do a lot of things, and they could just pay somebody. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know. I just believe Charles he knew like how to play, how everything was gonna go down. You had them occupied and busy with the poker, playing blackjack. They're not being 100% attentive. And how long were they gonna be attentive? Also, were they drinking or anything? But they did try to come save him. But
I was just trying to.
and why would you shoot? You can't shoot a ghost. If it is true, you're not shooting a ghost. You get what I mean? You're gonna shoot at an individual. But if the individual is already killing you or strangling you or whatever, you know, that's 1840. The autopsy system probably wasn't even as good as it is now, or let alone in 1940. 1940, the way they conducted things is not even as good as how they do it now. So you got to think about it. That's over 100 years, almost 200 years ago.
Facts.
So let's be real. Like, that's a high chance of possibility that.
I don't know. It's just it's an interesting story.
I know we'll talk about it more. We always do. Like, we all get the bird brief. Sometimes we talk about it way more in depth and try to piggyback off it. It seems where just each other's head is pertaining to certain story. What you for?
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking about something, my bad, but
What you think about?
Nothing.
Y'all spam us up in the comments, man. Y'all let us know how y'all feel about it in the comments. Y'all typically do some handful of y'all. Majority of y'all don't. But let us know how y'all feel about it in the comment section down below. But until next time, y'all know how it go, man. I do go by the name DJ New Kid. This is
Sierra Nicole.
We are.
We are.
Go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.